Deep in the forests of southern Norway lies a secluded farmhouse called Sølvfjell Farm. It had stood there for over 150 years, its once bright red paint now faded to a muted rust, and its wooden walls warped by decades of harsh winters. The farm had a dark reputation among the locals, whispered about in hushed tones over mugs of coffee at the village cafe. Some said it was cursed. Others claimed it was haunted by something far older than the farm itself, something tied to the land. Despite the warnings, the Eriksson family moved in during the fall of 1978. Lars and Ingrid Eriksson had bought the farm at a suspiciously low price, eager to escape city life and start over with their two daughters, 12-year-old Mari and 8-year-old Thea. To them, it seemed like a dream, acres of untouched forest, a crystal-clear lake just a short walk away, and no neighbors for miles. But the dream quickly began to unravel. The first few days passed without incident, though Lars couldn't help but notice how unusually cold the house felt, even with the wood stove burning. "Old houses are drafty," Ingrid reassured him, though she, too, found herself shivering at night. Thea started waking up crying, saying she heard someone whispering in her room. Mari dismissed her younger sister's claims as nightmares, but Ingrid began to notice shadows moving in her peripheral vision, shadows that didn't belong to anything in the room. One night, as Lars was chopping wood in the yard, Mari wandered to the edge of the forest. She swore she heard someone calling her name, a soft, sing-song voice drifting through the trees. It sounded like her mother's voice, but when she turned to look back at the house, Ingrid was standing in the kitchen window. Confused, Mari ran back inside and didn't mention the incident. But that night, she dreamed of a woman in a long, tattered dress standing at the edge of her bed, her face hidden beneath a veil of stringy black hair. The woman reached out to Mari, her fingers gnarled and covered in dirt, and whispered. Mari woke up screaming. Over the next few weeks, the activity escalated. Doors slammed shut on their own. Thea's toys were found stacked in strange pyramids in the middle of the living room. Ingrid discovered long scratches etched into the walls of the hallway, scratches too high up to have been made by any of the family. First, Lars tried to rationalize it. "It's an old house," he'd say. "The wind, creaky boards, it's all explainable." But one evening, as he was sitting in the living room reading, he heard heavy footsteps in the attic. Thinking it was a raccoon or a bird, he climbed the ladder to investigate. The attic was empty, but as he stood there in the suffocating darkness, he felt a pressure on his chest, as though something unseen was pushing against him. The air smelled sour, like rotting meat. Lars stumbled back down the ladder, pale and shaking. "There's something wrong with this house," he whispered to Ingrid. Ingrid began researching the history of Sølvfjell Farm. She learned that the original owners, a couple named Johannes and Alva Nordahl, had lived there in the late 1800s. Alva was known in the village as a healer, or, as some said, a witch. When a mysterious illness swept through the area and killed several children, the villagers blamed Alva. A mob stormed the farm one night, dragging Alva from the house and hanging her from the old oak tree in the yard. Her husband, Johannes, disappeared shortly after and was never seen again. The farm had changed hands many times since then, each new family leaving after just a few months. Stories of strange occurrences and unexplainable deaths followed the property like a dark cloud. Ingrid contacted a pair of investigators from Oslo who specialized in the paranormal, Henrik and Astrid Lund. The Lunds had spent years studying hauntings across Scandinavia, and they agreed to come to Sølvfjell Farm after hearing Ingrid's story. They arrived one cold November evening, bringing with them an array of equipment, cameras, recording devices, and tools to measure electromagnetic fields. From the moment they stepped inside the house, Astrid felt it. "There's something here," she said softly, her eyes scanning the dimly lit hallway. "It's angry." That night, the Lunds set up cameras in every room and conducted a séance in the living room. Ingrid, Lars, and the girls sat in a circle with them, holding hands. Thea clung tightly to her mother, her wide eyes darting around the room. As Henrik began to call out to any spirits in the house, the temperature dropped sharply. Their breath misted in the air, and the flames in the candles flickered violently. A loud bang echoed from the kitchen, followed by the sound of shattering glass. Ingrid jumped to her feet, but Astrid grabbed her arm. "Stay in the circle," she said firmly. And then they heard it, a woman's voice, soft and melodic, singing an old Norwegian lullaby. The voice drifted through the house, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Thea began to cry, burying her face in Ingrid's shoulder. Suddenly, one of the cameras toppled over, and the sound of footsteps thundered through the hallway. "I think it's her," Astrid whispered. "Alva." The next day, the Lunds reviewed the footage. On one of the cameras, they saw a shadowy figure standing at the foot of Mari's bed, its head tilted unnaturally to the side. In another, they captured what appeared to be scratch marks forming on the wall in real time, as if an invisible hand were carving them into the wood. That night, the activity reached its peak. As the family and the Lunds sat together in the living room, the lights began to flicker. The air grew heavy, oppressive, and the sound of the lullaby returned, louder this time. Suddenly, the front door flew open, and the unmistakable figure of a woman stood in the doorway. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow, and her hair hung in matted clumps. She pointed a bony finger at the family and screamed, a guttural, unearthly sound that shook the walls. Henrik and Astrid acted quickly, reciting prayers and burning sage as the figure advanced. Thea screamed as furniture flew across the room, narrowly missing her. Lars grabbed the girls and ushered them into the kitchen while Astrid threw salt at the entity, forcing it back toward the door. "Go back to where you came from," Astrid shouted, her voice trembling. With one final, deafening scream, the figure vanished. The house fell silent. The Eriksons moved out the next day, leaving Sølvfjell farm to rot in the forest. The Lunds believed they had banished Alva's spirit, but they warned the family that the land itself might still hold darkness. To this day, the farm remains abandoned. Locals say they still hear singing coming from the woods on quiet nights, and those brave enough to approach the house claim to see a figure standing in the window, watching. Waiting. No one stays at Sølvfjell farm for long,